Fan service. Fan service. Anyone who's watched anime has heard of it before. We all know what it is. If you clicked on this video just because the thumbnail had boobs in it, you've probably seen it before. Because you're a degenerate. Using just the basic definition of the term, fan service is anything included in a work of fiction solely to try and please the audience, specifically without contributing anything to the plot or media other than making the fans happy. Now, there are many different ways this can show up. It would be impossible for you to have consumed media before without seeing some form of fan service. It might be a cameo or reference in a movie, a character getting more screen time because of their popularity, a gratuitous action scene, or a horror movie with tons of gore. Even an encore at a concert would broadly be considered fan service. But by far, the most common form of fan service is the sexual kind. And I would say even more specifically, the anime kind. Because while the term still has that broader definition, most of the time you'll hear the words fan service, it'll be in reference to an anime with tons of lewd imagery. Skimpy outfits, bouncing breasts, panty shots, wardrobe malfunctions. How does that even happen? While media outside of anime and manga still include tons of sexual content, from shirtless dudes to bikini-clad women to the entire male cast of Game of Thrones penises, most of the time anime is still the only place you'll hear that sexualization referred to as fan service. And this is all widely regarded as a negative to the medium. Many people hate it unconditionally, and most people have some complicated opinion about it, as you can even see from this poll I ran on my channel. The term itself is negative and often used as a criticism of a piece of media. Oh, I liked this show, but it has too much fan service in it. So let's take a deep dive into the world of fan service. Where did it come from? Why is it so common despite being hated? And is there such thing as good fan service? Also, it should go without saying that this video will have tons of sexy anime girls and even a few guys. So if you're not into that sort of thing, or you're my dad, then I might suggest clicking off the video now. Now, to cover why fan service is so common, or at least my best guess, what better place to start than its history? After all, it wouldn't be a Lextorias video without an unnecessary amount of research. And as it turns out, the first recorded piece of media meant to pander to the audience with sex was a French film named Menina la fille sans voix, or Menina the girl without sails. I hope I got that pronunciation right. I only took French in school for like 9 years. The film featured the character of Menina, a woman in a bikini, which at the time of release in 1952 was considered very risque for American audiences. And so, when the movie was released in America, it was of course renamed to Menina, the girl in the bikini, even though Menina does not show up or wear a bikini until almost 2/3 of the way through the film. And none of this has anything to do with anime. I just think it's really interesting to talk about, because the sexualization of women to pander to a male audience has existed for such a long time, entirely separate to the anime community. But the first ever anime to include pandering of the sexual variety was a little series called Cutie Honey. Cutie Honey was a magical girl shonen manga originally created in 1973 by Go Nagai. It featured the titular character, Honey Kisaragi, having to transform from a Catholic schoolgirl into a magical superhero to defeat villains and save the world. The sexual element of the story then comes from Cutie Honey's design being a busty anime girl, as well as the fact that she loses all her clothes for part of her transformation. This brief nudity, as well as most of the show's plot, actually came from a retooling early in development, where it was originally intended as a shoujo series, meaning meant for girls, before they failed to make the time slot, and had to change into a shonen series, meaning meant for boys, to be aired. The shoujo version of the series didn't actually contain any PG material, but with the change in audience, the show's creator decided to add nudity and more violence in order to pander to the male audience, and thus, fan service in anime was born. And fun fact, Cutie Honey is credited as the first shonen anime with a female protagonist. So, girl power, I guess. Though Cutie Honey did end up becoming a very popular franchise. Through the years, the show had its original anime spawn tons of spin-offs and sequels, including a live-action movie and tie-in show directed by Hideaki Anno, creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And let's actually talk about Anno for a second, because he is a key piece in the history of fan service. While anime and manga, especially in the magical girl genre, followed in the footsteps of Cutie Honey, pursuing more and more overt nudity and sexualization, it was actually Anno's studio Gainax that further pushed the envelope. Because before Gainax was officially created in 1984, the founders actually started off creating fan films for the Japanese sci-fi convention Daikon in 1981. Their studio was originally called Daikon Film, and the first animations they premiered were called Daikon 3 and 4, named after the third and fourth convention they premiered at. The fan films are what you would expect of an animation group formed entirely of college students attending a sci-fi convention, featuring everything from a mech battle between Macross characters and Godzilla to a lightsaber fight between an anime girl and Darth Vader, all to the soundtrack of one of the James Bond films, as well as an Electric Light Orchestra song. More important than the blatant copyright infringement, however, was Daikon 4's appropriation of the Playboy bunny suit on its main character, as this was a very skimpy outfit at the time, which would go on to be a staple of sexy anime girls everywhere. And once Gainax officially formed from the members of Daikon Film, they would take this sexualization to all of their future works. The first major influence of Gainax was actually Hideaki Anno's directorial debut, Gunbuster, in 1988. The mecha anime was an OVA, meaning it didn't air on television, and was thus allowed to show more nudity and adult themes, primarily through its multiple bathing scenes and ridiculous jiggling. The jiggle was actually so prominent in Gunbuster that it inspired the term Gainaxing or Gainax bounce in order to describe over-the-top anime boob bouncing, typically with each breast moving independently of one another. And that proclivity for skimpy outfits, casual nudity, and absurd breast physics carried over from Gunbuster into anime as a whole. Now, I don't think Gainax was solely responsible for the popularity of fan service, the same way I don't think Cutie Honey was, but considering they had an entire term invented to describe how they animated breasts, it's pretty obvious they had a major effect. No effect so major as possibly coining the term, though. Yes, that's right, on top of pioneering anime bunny girls and bouncing anime boobs, the first usage of the term fan service to describe sexual pandering was in 1991's Otaku no Video, produced by none other than Gainax themselves. Now, I will say it is highly unlikely to be the actual invention of the term, because for as much research as I did online, I can't seem to find that information anywhere. But Gainax's parody anime on otaku culture and their own studio's founding does use the term fan service to describe sexual scenes meant to pander to the audience before any other mention of it online or in media. So what I think is most likely is the term was unofficially coined somewhere in the Japanese otaku space in the late 80s, possibly even referring to Gainax's work like Gunbuster, and then Otaku no Video is definitely what cemented it in pop culture, because it's only after 1991 that the term gained widespread appeal. Early internet users began adopting it, the definition of the term became broadly known, and in 1995, with the release of Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gainax themselves were once again using the term, with some of the characters in the show even promising more fan service in the previews for next week's episode. Which is incredibly funny when you consider just how critically acclaimed Evangelion is. That this deep exploration of trauma, religion, and the human psyche started off as a mech show with girls in latex suits made by the jiggling boobs guys. And it's by the mid-90s that fan service just became an integral part of anime as a whole, an inseparable part of the culture that exists and thrives to this day. So here is where I'll break away from the timeline a bit to explore the question of why. Why is fan service so popular? Why did it continue to grow from 1998 to where it is today? Alright, next question. I mean, shonen is by far the most popular genre of anime to exist, and it literally just translates to boys comic. Its only defining trait is that it's a genre made for teenage boys, and what could they love more than boobs? Well, how about today's sponsor, NordVPN? I'm just kidding. Nobody's sponsored me yet. That would have been a sick transition though, you gotta admit. Ever since the Cutie Honey anime transitioned from a shoujo time slot to a shonen time slot and decided that nude power-ups would be exciting, it was game over. If your primary market is teenage boys, of course you're gonna push the envelope into softcore porn territory as hard and fast as possible. It's literally free money, especially when the majority of Japan's young men are overworked and single, with 50% of Japanese males at age 20 saying they never had a girlfriend. Needless to say, there is a massive audience in Japan of young men who desire sexual content, and animation studios are more than willing to cater to them. And that might be the biggest reason why fan service is so prominent in anime. While a lot of countries are just as open about sexuality and nudity in television, very few have the specific lonely male youth problem that Japan has. Plus, countries like the US are just so incredibly behind when it comes to openness for sexual content. You've got things like the Hays Code from 1934 to 1967, which banned nudity, suggestive clothing, and scenes of passion not integral to the plot, as well as massive pressure from religious groups to boycott any media that didn't uphold those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely. That's such a fucking stupid line. I hate that line. Which all leads to America being effectively 30 years behind every other country when it comes to sexual content and still struggling to catch up. This is a large reason why cartoons in the West still market themselves towards children, whereas anime in Japan markets to 15 to 25-year-olds and has no problem showing them titties. And so that whole long section is the history of fan service, or at least everything I know about it and think is interesting. But we still haven't covered why it's so controversial. I mean, it can't just be a case of indecency because a lot of anime fans are in fact incredibly horny. I myself love big anime titties and ripped dudes. They're fantastic. But the problem lies more in how that sexuality is executed within the show. Referring back to the poll I ran, only 2% of people enjoyed fan service in all circumstances. 35% enjoyed it when it fit the show or wasn't intrusive, and 23% enjoyed it in select shows. So a combined 58% majority of people said that they enjoyed fan service in select shows, typically when it wasn't intrusive. The problem then is the shows where it is intrusive, where only 2% of people said that they still enjoyed it. So what is intrusive fan service? Well, to answer that question, I want to talk about an anime I just recently finished watching. It's called Fire Force, and anyone who's seen that show immediately knows where I'm going with this. Fire Force is a great show. It's a shonen anime about a world where people spontaneously turn into demons, and a special team of firefighters with pyrokinesis are tasked with taking them out. There is a lot more than that, including a group of villains they fight, but for the most part it's cool action scenes between people with fire powers. It's also animated by David Productions, the people who make JoJo, and carries over some of the insanely cool sound design they use for that show. However, there is a character in Fire Force called Tamaki. She's pretty cool, she's got fire cat powers, and it took me 6 episodes to realize that her and another character just named Maki were 2 different people. But far and away, the most important thing about Tamaki to both this video and her inclusion in the show is that she has a special ability called the Lucky Lecher Lure, which I believe is meant to be a play on words in Japanese that got roughly translated into English, and basically means lucky pervert syndrome. In other words, she has a canonical power in the show, acknowledged by other characters, that puts her into lewd situations through bad luck. Here's an example of that. In almost every episode of the show, Tamaki will slip and fall and have her boob fall into a character's hand, or all of her clothes fly off, or something equally perverted. It is honestly insane how much the show is willing to bend reality in order to have someone accidentally molest this girl. And on the surface, her superpower is just a bit annoying, but it isn't critically negative to the anime. Fire Force is already an incredibly horny show and is willing to put every character in the nude at some point. Like, you remember Maki, that girl I talked about confusing Tamaki with? She's ripped. Oh, and what about the nun, Iris? Yes, they have a nun on the team. Surely nothing bad would ever happen to... Oh my god. I mean, what about a character whose only defining trait is that they are fully clothed head to toe? I mean, you can't even see her face with this thing on. What the fuck? The show even has a nude firefighter calendar episode just as an excuse to get all the characters naked. Oh, and I don't even mean the girls. It's the boys this time. The entirety of Fire Force is just horny, which is totally fine because that's just the tone of the show. But what does become a problem at some point is Tamaki, because she is sexualized to such a degree that the fan service becomes her only defining character trait. Not only does she get into unfortunate situations in every episode for no other reason than to give the audience a boner, but the fan service actively interferes with the plot and her character. Now, I'll try not to spoil anything, but Tamaki at some point ends up getting ambushed and beat up trying to protect some kids. She's not the best fighter and almost gets beat to death by a character she previously trusted, leaving her a bruised mess in the ground who our main character Shinra has to save. Tamaki looks up at Shinra, crying, begging him to save her because she's so emotionally overwhelmed at what's happening. He steps up like the hero he is and begins fighting the bad guy. And then this happens. Alright, well that just deflated every ounce of tension in the scene, and that's not even where it ends. Dude, what the fuck? What am I supposed to be feeling right now? Seriously. Because when you strategically burn all of her clothes off and have her do her cute little cat pose, I legitimately think you want me to feel horny looking at a character who was almost just beaten to death. And Tamaki continues to be in this weirdly erotic outfit for the rest of the fight. She even gives Shinra a serious emotional speech while looking like this. Again, do you want me to take this seriously? Because remove the sexualization from this scene and it's one of the most emotional in the show. The tonal whiplash is just hurting my head at this point. And while this scene in particular is the worst offender, Tamaki's entire character throughout the whole show continues to be like this. She doesn't win any serious fights, she doesn't have any big redeeming moments, she loses and gets beat up and saved by one of the big strong male characters over and over again. It takes her 2 entire seasons to even begin developing her character or suggest that she should be taken seriously. And even at the end of her first training, with all this music swelling and emotion building as she starts to be a competent character, her dumb pervert ability kicks in and deflates the whole scene again. Tamaki is the textbook definition of a fan service character. Her whole reason for existing within the show is a vehicle for sex jokes and horny moments. That's it. Any contribution to the plot or action she has is undermined by her sexualization. Except for one scene of hers, one Tamaki exclusive moment that might be the best moment in the whole show, including the time a guy deflected a nuclear bomb. So to set up some context, the bad guys in Fire Force also have fire powers. Big shocker, I know. And during a confrontation against these bad guys in Season 1, Tamaki and the nun Iris end up against a guy named Assault. Please don't ask why there's nuns in this show, you already know the answer to that. Assault is hyped up beforehand and shown to be an incredibly powerful character. He attacks the girls, nearly kills them, and then this happens. As it turns out, Assault is a virgin, and even touching a girl just completely debilitates him, which Iris and Tamaki use to their advantage to just beat him to death with a lead pipe. It's a great subversion of tropes, an incredibly funny scene, and it's not even the one I'm talking about. Because much later, near the end of season 2, Assault recovers from having his brains bashed out and challenges Tamaki to a rematch. And the show goes through his training arc, where he locks himself inside his room and watches porn for a month straight in order to get over his incredible horniness. They then have their rematch, and this happens. That is amazing. I love how they went 110% on the sound design of Tamaki falling like that. It's probably the single funniest shot in the whole show, and Assault just fucking passes out after it. This, to me, is what the fan service in Fire Force could be. It's funny, tonally consistent, and contributes to the plot of the show. If all of the major fan service moments were saved for scenes like this, I would love it. But they end up spilling out into the serious moments of the show and clashing way too hard to be enjoyable. In the bigger picture, I don't think fan service itself is bad. While some people might object to it just on the basis of being too lewd, that isn't really the problem. I mean, if you're not okay seeing boobs in a show where a villain literally explodes a guy, that seems like a you problem. Fan service, more often than not, lightens up the mood of whatever it's put in. It will deflate the tension, it will overshadow the seriousness, it will, if done incorrectly, clash with any serious tone you're going for. You can certainly put fan service like Fire Force's into comedic scenes, because sex jokes work very well. You can put it into lighthearted scenes because it adds levity, but there are just some types of scenes that fan service like this should not be a part of. And the worst fan service elements in anime, the ones that turn people against it entirely, are when it's put into those types of scenes anyway. You'll have a dramatic or serious conversation punctuated by a middle school titty joke. It just isn't given the same level of maturity as the rest of the elements in the show, because to a lot of people, including its creators, fan service is still childish and immature by its very nature. Discussing the history and definition of the term, we know that fan service isn't added to a show for the same reason that the other elements are. It's to excite 15-year-old boys. It's to please the audience. It's to service the fans. So it's almost always put in with way less thought than any other element of the show. And that just doesn't work. Again, I have no problem with Tamaki vs. Assault because the whole premise is absurd. And I wouldn't have a problem with Tamaki's weird cat cry if they hadn't chose to be immature at a serious moment. Just keep her in her regular outfit, which is already very fan servicey. It just blends in better because it has reason to exist. Going off of that, you can have entire shows crammed full of fan service that are still done well because they know how to use it. Just look at Food Wars for an example of this. Food Wars is a cooking show. The entire plot is a kid who's good at cooking goes to enter a competition to be the best cook. Standard anime plot. Pretty much just a shonen story, but with cooking battles instead of anime fights. But the entire appeal of the show is its fan service, because every time someone eats a good dish in Food Wars, well, this happens. That happens every time. The food in this show gives people orgasms. That's just how it works. Is that a stupid premise? Yes. Is this show basically a hentai without the nudity? Also yes. But it isn't hiding any of that. Food Wars doesn't hide much of anything, actually. Food Wars wears its fan service on its sleeve. It is very open about being so sexual. And because it's a comedy, using busty women and ripped dudes in unexpected situations just blends right in seamlessly. The show uses every opportunity to make sex jokes or horny food scenes or ridiculous moments driven by hentai logic. And it will get every character naked to achieve this. Girls have food orgasms, guys have food orgasms, the main character has food orgasms, old men have food orgasms. The mechanic is treated entirely equally, which makes it even funnier when it happens to someone unexpected, not just all the hot girls. This equality also dissuades any idea that any specific character just exists for their sexiness. When every character on the show is sexualized, then none of them have to exist purely for eye candy. They can all be functioning characters because the show has no shortage of characters to draw horniness out of. And to top it off, the food orgasms even serve the plot, surprisingly enough. Because with an animated show about food, it can be very hard to show the audience how something might taste. We can see the delicious food, but how can we know what it's like to eat? Well, how about showing the person eating it nutting their brains out while describing the food like it's sex? That's not only a very convincing way to relay how good it is to the audience, but also a built-in set piece in the same way that special moves in shonen fights are. It's an excuse to go over the top and add excitement and crazy animation to something that in real life isn't that interesting to watch. And so even though Food Wars has way more fan service than a show like Fire Force could even dream of, none of it ever comes across negative like it does with Tamaki, because it's tonally consistent with the whole show, because the whole show doesn't take itself that seriously. Food Wars is one of the few shows that can achieve this sacred title of good fan service, almost entirely because it understands how to blend it in and make it work for the show. It isn't just a cooking show with nudity slapped in, the fan service is a critical element. And so before we wrap up this discussion of fan service, I want to cover just one more show, because it would be a disservice to the entire video to not cover it. But before I do, let's jump back into the history of Gainax, because I didn't quite finish telling the story. With the release of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which went on to be one of the biggest anime properties of all time, you would think Gainax would be doing great. And they were, if only for a short while. It was only 2 years after the release of this massively successful show, however, that Gainax would start to fall, as it had been revealed that the company had concealed 1.56 billion yen in revenue from Evangelion that they had failed to pay taxes on. Being audited by Japan's National Tax Agency, the president, Takeshi Sawamura, and his accountant were both arrested and sent to jail in July of 1999 for accounting fraud. In light of this, one of the studio's founding members, Yasuhiro Takeda, had this to say: "I don't think he purposefully set out with the goal of evading taxes. It was more that our level of accounting knowledge wasn't up to the task of dealing with revenues on such a large scale." And all of this is very serious stuff, but that quote is kind of funny, you gotta admit. Like, I don't know, maybe don't run a major company if you just kind of forget how to do taxes sometimes. Maybe hire an accountant with the millions of dollars you are hoarding. Just a thought. But that's not even where it ends. From 2000 to 2016, Gainax would face a whole heap of lawsuits, including breach of contract and failure to pay 100 million yen in royalties to Hideaki Anno after he formed another studio in 2006. Then in 2016, Gainax's headquarters moved and were reportedly being run out of a 45-year-old 2-bedroom apartment in Tokyo. I swear I'm not making that up, though it is very hard to find verifiable sources for that information. And the darkest part of all, in 2018, Gainax's new president, Tomohiro Maki, was sentenced to 3 years in jail for indecent acts. Now, I won't ruin this anime titty video by talking about what he did. You can look that up for yourself, it's pretty bad. But somewhat fortunately, a ray of sunshine was starting to form over the dumpster fire that Gainax turned into. And that ray of sunshine is Studio Trigger. And also Kara, Hideaki Anno's new studio, but this is a video about anime boobs, not Evangelion. Trigger was founded in 2011 by former Gainax employees Hiroyuki Imaishi and Masahiko Utsuka following their success on Gurren Lagann in 2007. And coming from a show about teenagers trying to fight God with mech robots and the power of friendship, Trigger carved out their personality from over-the-top ridiculous shows. The first of which being Kill la Kill. Kill la Kill is the fan service show. That's the only way I can describe it. Over half a century of jiggling titties and panty shots have all led up to this one show. Kill la Kill is a shonen story following our female protagonist Ryuko Matoi as she searches for her father's killer by enrolling in the prestigious and militaristic Honnouji Academy. The school's leader is the fearsome Satsuki Kiryuin. The school's leader is the fearsome Satsuki Kiryuin, who Ryuko challenges in order to learn the truth. This leads to various members of the school getting in Ryuko's way, who she must defeat to work her way up to finally confronting Satsuki. And all of this is typical shonen. The plot on its surface level is not any different to your typical male-centric battle shows. What separates Kill la Kill is everything other than that surface level plot. The way that powers work in Kill la Kill is entirely based on clothing. People have things called life fibers sewn into their outfits that give the wearer superhuman abilities. And Ryuko finds a special sentient piece of life fiber clothing called a kamui that gives her shonen protagonist level strength when she goes through a transformation from an ordinary schoolgirl into this. Now this is a lot. It's a magical girl transformation very similar to Cutie Honey from back in 1973. And just like Cutie Honey, the magical girl genre that previously existed in shows for girls is being brought into a shonen with much more nudity. Much more nudity. And that's the point, because a lot of people, when they first see Ryoko's transformation, or Satsuki's transformation since she has similar powers, are immediately taken aback by how ridiculous it all is. These are teenage girls. They're fighting in outfits that make lingerie look like a burqa in the most ridiculous, over-the-top battle sequences that show off every part of their body that the animators can think of. This must obviously be a show for horny men and nothing more than that. Except it is more than that. Kill la Kill is purposefully overloading the sexualization. Even outside of the main character's outfits, you've got constant sex jokes and ridiculous camera angles and an entire faction of people that are literal nudists. That is blatantly insane. But even more than, say, Food Wars, which uses the fan service as part of the plot, Kill la Kill is a plot about fan service. It's literally about all this. This sexualization is the main story. The powers in Kill la Kill all revolve around clothing, and the way in which the main character overcomes other people's powerful clothes is by fighting in basically the nude in her kamui. She's initially forced into wearing it because it's sentient and attaches to her against her will. Throughout the show, however, she bonds with it and starts using it of her own volition. She becomes empowered by it. The main villain, on the other hand, wants everyone to wear specific clothing as a form of control. This clothing is the tool in which they exert their power over others by giving them abilities through the life fibers, but also taking away their free will. And the main faction of people fighting this oppression are literal nudists. They shun the clothes and their oppression, instead becoming empowered by their lack of clothing. And if any of this isn't coming together yet, the title of the show, Kill la Kill, comes from Japanese wordplay on how the words for wearing clothes and killing someone are pronounced the same. Kill la Kill literally translates to dressed to kill. Going even more in depth, Kill la Kill's protagonist is a young schoolgirl. Her kamui normally takes the form of a sarafuku, a traditional Japanese school uniform that represents female youth. And she can only transform into her empowered, sexualized form with a sacrifice of some of her blood. Ryuko and Satsuki literally bleed in order to transform into sexy, mature versions of themselves. If you don't think that's an obvious metaphor for puberty and womanhood, I don't think we're watching the same show. And going even more in depth, you can talk about the show's use of fan service. The show is painfully aware of how fan service can take power away from characters and uses that as part of the story. The fan service isn't meant to take away their power. They are wearing these outfits purposefully. They are aware of their sexualization and draw power through it. And anytime the women are sexualized without their consent, it is very clearly used as a tool against them. It is meant to shame them, and they're meant to overcome that. Whereas again, going back to Fire Force, every element of fan service with Tamaki is against her will. It is constantly being used against her, and as such, severely undermines her character. In Kill la Kill, there is no attempt to use the fan service to reduce the female characters to sex objects, and the show is very careful in making you aware of that. So the whole of Kill la Kill, even further than being about clothing, is a show about female empowerment. It's about young girls becoming women and choosing to take power from their sexualization instead of letting it control them. And it's a show about fan service. It's a satire of the entire trope and a story about its use in media. Trigger is very explicitly questioning the audience's motivation for watching lewd scenes. It's pointing the spotlight at you to ask you why you enjoy this. It's fun to watch Satsuki fight in her ridiculous outfit, and yet when she's getting sexually assaulted by her mother, suddenly all the nudity isn't that appealing. I mean, it doesn't get more obvious than the fact that every time Ryoko transforms or does something lewd, there's a giant crowd of men cheering it on and getting nosebleeds. That's supposed to be you, motherfucker. They're making fun of you. All of Kill la Kill uses fan service not just as a plot device or set dressing, but as a storytelling method. Because without the prominence of fan service in anime and pop culture, you couldn't have a story that's so expertly told using it. And without knowing some of the history of fan service like I've covered, I don't really think you could appreciate it in Kill la Kill, because the plot is actually part of the plot. So for anyone interested in deeper discussion of the show and its use of fan service, I'd highly recommend this 4-part video series on Kill la Kill by Study of Swords. It goes into a lot more depth than I could, so I'll link it in the description. So with this video, I think I've looked at every possible angle I could cover fan service in anime from. We've looked at its history, where it came from, and why it's so popular. And we've seen some bad and great examples to help us understand if it can be used well or not. And hopefully this all highlights the complexity of the topic. Fan service might just be boobs and butts and horny manga authors on the surface, but it can be so much more than that. And like any element in a piece of media, its inclusion and how it's used are very important. Because there are a lot of shows that do not use fan service well at all. They have characters that just exist to get the audience horny, or awful intrusive bits that deflate the whole scene. Pandering beach episodes, or characters getting perved on, or a girl slipping and falling pussy first onto the main character's face. Or just characters that are clearly not adults getting sexualized. Like, I am of the firm belief that you should just mentally increase the age of any anime character by like 3 years because it'll make the show better. Ain't no way that Okabe, this scruffy looking college dude, is meant to be 18. This man is clearly like 25. But hey, sometimes these are just children you're showing me. That is a fucking child. I don't care if age is just a number, that number is 911. You should be in fucking prison.
We got him.
I don't think fan service will ever go away. And I think instead of people complaining online about this has too much or this show is ruined because of it, we should instead ask ourselves, how could it be done better? It's fine to include adult content and sexuality, you just have to include it in a good way. You know, make sure the fan service fits the story and its characters. If you want to be lighthearted, add all the sex jokes and pervy moments you want, but if you want to be serious and dark, get the boob jokes the fuck away from there. Or just make the whole tone of the show adult so no single character feels like their inclusion is just for eye candy. Include adult themes or nudity into the plot, or include it in the storytelling in some way. If you're already gonna show me bouncing boobs, you can at least make them feel not out of place. I don't want the show feeling like it's made for 12-year-olds up until the moment you show me softcore porn. Nobody was about to recommend interspecies reviewers before they saw a titty. What that tells me is that the fan service doesn't fit. It feels out of place in the show. You've got to match the level of maturity, or else don't consider putting the fan service in there in the first place. And I think on the other side of this, a lot of people in the anime community need to stop being so immature when it comes to this stuff. It can be pretty insane the amount of mental gymnastics people pull to try and convince themselves that titties in television are inherently shameful. This anime is trash and so am I argument people make to try and infer that every show with nudity in it is dumb male pandering is awful. I hate it. Because no, just the process of showing skin does not preclude an anime from being good or enjoyable for other reasons or even intellectual. It just means that it showed skin. That's it. A show can be thoughtful and engaging and full of deeper meaning and also show nudity, and those two elements can exist entirely separate from one another. I think the anime community really needs to look into fan service if we want shows to improve, because the main thing I see holding it back right now is the collective immaturity that we have towards it. People on both the creators and the viewer side still treat nudity and sexual content with way less thought than it deserves, which leads to these elements never being able to be explored or expanded on fully more than the childish ways they're used in shows like Fire Force. All fan service and sexuality and nudity are, at the end of the day, are elements to a story. And like every other element, you can use them better and make them more enjoyable. You can fit them in and give them importance, and you can make them a positive part of the experience, not an inherently negative one. You just have to put some thought into it. So instead of turning away shows just because they have fan service, think of how easily we could be recommending them because they have good fan service. I mean, who doesn't like anime boobs? Thank you so much for watching. Funnily enough, this video started as a short comedic script before I turned it into this full-length video essay on anime titties, which is the case for most of my videos, but I still have no idea how I got enough content to write an 8,000-word script on all of this. So yeah, if you liked it, maybe consider subscribing for more videos like this one, or just give it a little thumbs up to help boost it in the algorithm. This video is basically guaranteed to get age restricted because how dare I make a video with cleavage in it on this child-friendly platform? Unrelated, here's a bunch of hentai I found on YouTube, but fucking whatever. So if you'd like to support this channel by becoming a member, I'd highly appreciate it. A channel membership starts at just $1 a month, gets you a cool little badge next to your name, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes editing timelines for every video, and your name in the credits like these cool people right here. You could spend more than $1 a month if you'd like to, or you're a crypto billionaire, but it's not necessary. As always, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.